just to make a start, my name is Lisa Boden. I am one of the co-directors of EPIC. I'm responsible for the policy and impact side of things, and I'm also head of the veterinary school in Edinburgh and Dean of Veterinary Medicine for Edinburgh University. It's a real privilege to be able to chair this session this afternoon. This panel discussion, I think we benefited this afternoon from some really dynamic lectures, and they were really fantastic, of very high quality, and we're very fortunate to have some of the panelists up on the floor here to be able to offer some provocations, I hope, and then answer some questions. But I'd love it to be as dynamic as possible. So I haven't told the panelists this yet, but I think what I'll do is offer an opportunity for each of them to respond to an initial prompt, and then try to then reach back into the audience and back again, and then move the conversation along. But on the panel here, you've met already. You've Scott and Abbie, Iain, McKendrick, who you know already. We have Miruna and Niamh at the end. Hopefully I've pronounced your names correctly. And we're delighted that you would participate. So I want to start, this session's really about data-driven innovation challenges in animal health policy and practice beyond 2030. And we've had a lot of information today and yesterday around what we think the data-driven changes might look like. And in particular, the question to the panel is, what do we think that UK farmers and livestock keepers will want to make to their production systems? And what challenges and opportunities will this generate for policymakers? And I'm starting here because our business is really aligned very well with the policymakers, and it's a test to know whether we know our audiences. And the words "will they want to make" is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that challenge, because I suppose there's a difference between what we can do, what we need to do, but importantly, what do people want to do? And that's the heart of the question. So I'm going to turn first to Scott. Surprise. And see what you'd like to offer back in terms of challenges, opportunities, but things that you think are the direction of challenge and direction of travel for what farmers and livestock keepers will want to do in terms of data-driven innovation.
I think what farmers want to do is produce good food, and they want us to give them the tools to do that. Mm-hmm. So ScotEID, we've got My Herd Stats, which is a tool designed to help beef farmers.
Am I putting you in a difficult position there?
Yeah, I wanted to think about it more.
Okay, well, why don't we, Abbie, do you want to pick up? Yeah.
I think there's so much information out there for farmers, and I guess sometimes it's quite overwhelming for them in practice how they can apply all the information and use all the data that's out there to their advantage, whether that is for profitability and also for efficiency. You know, at the end of the day, farmers want to make their life as easy as it can be, but they need the opportunity to use everything, you know, that's being researched and make it available to them, you know, in a way like My Herd Stats, something that is easy, accessible, and easy for them to understand, rather than them becoming overwhelmed with perhaps lots of academia that they maybe don't understand. I guess there's a bridge there that needs to be crossed between those that are researching information and getting it out there to be used practically by farmers.
So can I just push you a little bit on what do you mean by efficiency for farmers, from a farmer's perspective? Efficiency
from a farmer's perspective is getting the animal, perhaps, so speaking about cattle production, is, you know, producing an animal that is going to have high vigour for them, so it's easy when the animal is born that, for example, a calf, it'll get up and suckle naturally without too much intervention, and then being efficient in the way it puts on weight conversion from whatever feed that it's receiving, keeping that really financially stable as well for the farmer, and getting that to market in an efficient way. So basically turning a profit, but also making their herd more efficient in the way that, you know, are they keeping the correct animals? Are they using the correct breeds? And just taking that all in together. And I guess efficiency, it is time management as well, and making sure they're using the best of their time to produce the best food that they can.
Thank you. So that's very interesting. So we've started with at one end of the cycle, with consumption, all the way back to production and EPIC. If I can come to you, Iain, what do you think that our livestock farmers will want, and what are the big challenges for EPIC in that picture?
Wow. I think it's quite easy to kind of see some of the trends about what options farmers will have available to them. The difficult question is actually what they actually want to do and be able to afford to do. But then actually you can twist that in its head, because we can be sure that some farmers will want to go down very much down the whole precision agriculture route, and we can define that in a minute. Whereas there'll be others which definitely will be much less keen, and that actually generates its own problems and issues which we might want to come back to later in the discussion. But I mean, in terms of precision agriculture in our sector, I think it's fairly clear that we're looking at both collection and utilising of more data at the herd level, and potentially also at the individual animal level, which creates opportunities, which again I think is what we're probably going to be talking through in this session.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And I mean, if we can come to, when we move down sort of the track here now, both of you are in a completely different field, and so you're able to offer some insights into some of the technical elements. And some of the conversations we had earlier were allusions to personalised medicine or personalised veterinary medicine, for example. And Iain has just said there information, and there was a conversation earlier in the day with Giles around sort of whether we look at the individual cow or we aggregate up to the farm and back again. Do you have any comments on how you sort of, what technologies you think are going to be most useful for the future for farmers that way, that they may want as well as?
So we do speak here about a huge amount of data collected from farmers, and I think that can be very useful if also maybe data scientists or even AI researcher will try to have a look and try to have a better understanding of how this data looks like, try to think about data quality, try to identify maybe even from a visualization perspective some insights, and even going further maybe to other artificial intelligence model, like as you actually specify as well. Mm-hmm. So from simple machine learning models like decision trees, extreme boosting algorithm, or classifier, like simple classifiers, to even further to maybe deep neural networks and even large language models, yes.
Thanks. Do you want to add, Niamh?
I think in terms of sort of adopting new technologies and stuff, it will come down on one level to the size of the farm. Like the bigger farmers are going to possibly be more enthusiastic about these emerging technologies. When it comes to the challenges that you're going to be looking at, I think a big one would be like the initial investment that needs to be made in order to implement a lot of these things. There could also be issues to do with people's not being sure about data security and those kind of things.
Do you mean investment in terms of time and energy learning how to use things, or do you mean actual like
both,
infrastructure?
I would say, yeah.
And it brings me to the question, which I'm going to throw back out into the audience, because we have farmers in the audience and the people who actually use this. But we've, I wonder if I'm making an assumption here, but we've talked a little bit in the context of there are people who are the people who produce the data. There are people who, if you like, own and control the data. There are people who use the data. EPIC might be a data user, as well as people who create the tools for those data that then give it back. But do we think that, I mean, are we imagining future what is already happening, right? That farmers are the makers of the data and the users of the technology and the creators of those technologies too. Is that what you mean in terms of that investment that farmers need to make?
Yes.
Is that the future that we need to enable?
Yes, I think so. I'm not sure how we do that, but...
Well, we might throw out to the audience just to see what the reaction is to some of those comments, and then come back to the panel with questions. So there's a question at the back there, please.
Thank you, Lisa. Iain Duncan-Miller, hill farmer from Highland, Perthshire. You pose the question, what do farmers want? We're the same as everyone else in this room. We want to have a decent living, but we're running businesses. Those businesses have got to be profitable. We've had a lot of interesting talks today. I think the most valuable part of that is to get that knowledge and that information out there and available. At the end of the day, those of us who are running businesses, we will harvest the information which is of use to us in our business, because profit at the end of the day is what we need. Without that, we are not sustainable. We are being faced with a number of challenges coming from different areas, whether it be for biodiversity, carbon, climate change. All these things are coming down the track in the rural economy. Without the farms being profitable, none of these other things can be addressed. So that it's true in agriculture as it is in any other business. If your business is not profitable, it's not sustainable. So for us, what do we want? We want to have access to that information, access to the learning, access to the output from very good science, so that we can pick up and harvest the bits which are of use to us in our particular business. And that would then allow us to meet those primary objectives.
Thank you. It's a nice comment. Does anyone want to pick up on that and expand, please, Jenny? The microphone? Yeah, there we go. There we go. Sorry. Thank you.
Hi, yeah, Jenny Purcell, Scottish Government. I just wanted to pick up on one of the points that Iain just highlighted, actually, the carbon audits that are now becoming a really big driver of government policy and therefore also farm support, and there's obviously a wider social interest in that. And so I think I suspect that farmers probably have an interest in accurately measuring their carbon footprint and learning how to intervene in it. And we are still, it's quite a new area, really. It's hard to ascribe. I'm constantly trying to make the case that healthier animals have a smaller carbon footprint. They're more greenhouse gas efficient, which I think everyone kind of intuitively, in this room, everyone would probably agree with that as an idea. But actually measuring that is really hard. So I think greater clarity on greenhouse gas efficiency metrics would be helpful.
Thank you. There's a comment in the back.
Hi, it's Stephen Thompson from SRUC. Just picking up on Jenny's point there. So myself and Andrew Moxie a few years ago wrote a couple of things for ScotGov on this, is that we seem to be obsessing about the individual diseases when it comes to carbon, but the high-level metrics that the national inventory can pick up on are few and far between. So animal days is important, how many days of life, and then how many days of life of offspring, etc. So calving intervals, age to slaughter, growth to first calving of heifers, all of these things matter and will impact on the national inventory. The carbon footprint the farmers are doing isn't the same thing, and that message has to be understood, is that they're doing probably a life cycle analysis and more of a scope 3 emissions footprint, which takes in imported fertiliser, soya, all of those things into the mix. And it's slightly, the government's position on this and the farmer's position is slightly mixed and confused at times. So the government are after reducing this thing called the national inventory, which is about Scotland's contribution from production to global climate change. But we're talking about potentially just importing emissions. And we need to better understand all of those things. Going back to Iain's point, it's like the data is incredibly rich if we just know how to interpret it. And I don't think we fully appreciate how to interpret all of these data sets yet. So I've got a transition matrix I was showing somebody earlier on, which basically shows barren cows to barren cows that previously calved. In 15-16 we were at 45,000 cows that didn't have a calf for 2 years that previously calved. Could have maybe not had one for 3 years. And that's now dropped to under 25,000. It'll probably be under 20,000 now. So the industry is improving and becoming more efficient. But we need to basically use the data to demonstrate this. to help inform the government who are making policy decisions that farmers react very negatively to, saying, you're trying to tell us how to do our blooming job. And that's a difficult message for us all to get. And bringing the vet services in and bringing the vet practices in to basically help farmers interpret that data. And it is complex data. We've got lots of complex data. And that is needed alongside researchers better understanding what the data is actually telling us. And just as a final question, and it's a bit, maybe is it a question or a point, Scott mentioned earlier, or Abbie might have, about the beef efficiency scheme. And we had a system in the BES data, and I've got the BES data which I've looked at, where we just put a B behind the animal ID. So it was given a fictional ID number for dead animals. So that calf was born dead, wasn't registered, and then the farmers were asked about the cause of death. Now that data for this group of people looking at disease and looking at how do we improve the health of the farm business and the health of the animals, that kind of level of data is vital. And we really need to try and work out how can we incentivise farmers to actually put that data back into the system and allow them to register dead animals. That's the only way we're ever going to know the true impact of ill health and on carbon, what the root causes of these things are, etc. So it's how can we do that, and how do we get the policymakers to understand the benefit of that data?
Thank you. I mean, I just want to go back to the panel and just see if you'd like to respond to that point about, that's a very specific point really about a dimension of those data. And I'll offer it back in, or do you have anything you want to respond to that or comment on?
I think what Iain said, we should, I would love to bring that back in. Dave, yeah.
As in the data
you know,
for the, okay?
Yeah, for mortalities.
Okay. But what is the barrier?
Sorry, Fiona. We're not allowed to. So,
got it. Okay, so there's a
as
policy.
I said earlier, if it's a policy thing, so if it's born alive, it's tagged but not registered, they can register it. If it's born alive but dies before it's tagged, they can't do anything with it. If it's, again, stillbirths, etc., they can't, that sits in the holding register on farm.
So one of the things I think, just to summarise where we are and bring it back up into a high-level discussion, is that, some of the points that we're raising here is that the technical ability is here, the desire is here, we're on the frontier of many of these opportunities, the data are there, but it is the accessibility of those data, the use and the synthesis of those data, and then the sharing of those data and making it available and findable for farmers in particular. And then there's a broader picture, I think, that's been raised around pairing and making sure that it's very clear from a policy angle to understand the relationship between climate and health, whether it's human health or animal health, and indeed, when we're talking about One Health, how all of these things are interlinked, which is very complex in a policy landscape. So some big challenges, really, which perhaps keep us perhaps moving slower than the pace of technological development. And when we're thinking back in the context of EPIC and disease priorities and how we use our data here for specific things around outbreak response, we have to think about those co-benefits, even though we are tasked to do something quite specific. Is that a fair comment? Does anyone want to react to that summary? Is that moving the conversation on a little bit? Because one of the next steps is then, how do we work well with farmers? We had a great presentation earlier from Niamh around the social science of this and actually participatory efforts and co-development, co-design, co-use with farmers and other types of stakeholders. Do people want to offer some comments on that? Maybe I can start at the other end of the table from the highly technical and wonder what role does that thinking play in terms of, we talk about sort of design informatics and human-centered approaches. Where do farmers fit in your process, if at all?
Yeah, in terms of my process, I'm not entirely sure. I think it comes down to there needs to be a consistent and sort of useful dialogue between policymakers and farmers to ensure that the policies, this has already been said, I think, to ensure that the policies that are being put in place make sense in a real world farming context. moving forward, then there also needs to be, I think, systems put in place to enable farmers to actually take up these kind of these technologies. There needs to be, like I said last time, farmers need to be enabled to learn how these technologies work.
I mean, Miruna, some of the things that you were talking about, and we got into kind of philosophical conversation about AI, talking to AI, and I couldn't help thinking about where the could we, in reaching for the starry heights of the AI to the AI, we may have to go back actually to basics and human-to-human conversations there, and actually where do we fit in that in terms of the erosion of our ability to make independent judgments as people with experience and expertise, the lived experience, for example, of stakeholders and the farmers, versus those becoming quite technocratic in our decision making, which we already are to some degree.
So we will need actually to put together maybe even AI researchers, like the statistic departments, mathematics, because here we speak about different models, together with the farmers and try to actually identify what kind of data they have, how useful is that data, and I just hear about the accessibility issues. So clearly to try to create maybe a repository at the beginning and share all this data with everyone, if it's possible. Now some information might be confidential, right? But you could still scramble the data, try maybe to modify maybe some features name or try to hide some information. However, provide that accessibility and let others to actually try to test it somehow and try to see if they can figure something interesting as well. So I spoke about using actually natural language explanations and try to do this communication between non-expert users, and when I say non-expert, I'm thinking about my artificial intelligence field, but actually everyone is an expert on their own domain. So actually combine all these experts, for example, from agriculture to AI experts and even going further, and actually make an agreement maybe and try to see what will be the next step. So I propose, for example, maybe a repository for data. Another step might be how you could maybe prepare the data for example, statistic or AI models. So try to think a bit further actually about also what we could offer. Because as I say, sometimes when you use these artificial intelligence models, I want to say actually machine learning and statistics, when you use them, you of course can get up some results quicker and they are quite accurate. You won't have a human that will actually go to all that data points or try to figure out something. So yeah, I think that will be something useful, put everyone together, working as a big group.
Well, I like that very much, and I suppose that what comes to mind are sort of citizen assemblies or these types of different types of working groups that come together. But one of the things that Jess was talking about, I think in your presentation, you were saying that actually where a lot of this technology is developing is actually, it used to be the domain of the academic institution, and it's now been outsourced into the private industry. And that creates big challenges between what's private and public information and then I'm not an economist, but those will probably correct me around what is a public good in terms of health and the climate and where that all sits. So I'm curious, just from anybody else on the panel, yourself included, if you wanted to comment on some of those challenges. Happy to pick up wherever on the panel on that.
Maybe if I start.
Please, yeah.
Lisa, you'll remember, and some of the people in the room will remember, the surveillance scenario planning exercise we carried out
in 2016.
That long ago?
Well, I remember it well.
But amongst the scenarios that we actually concluded as being high, real possibilities and possibly not at all desirable, was the risk of data siloing of surveillance data. And we could see that happening in different ways, and unfortunately they are all kind of happening. Whether it's actually the consolidation of vet practices, who then have contracts with specific laboratories to do tests, so that actually the data flow is increasingly concentrated into a small number of private operators, where government don't have actually the ability actually to access that private data, or any other essentially private, that kind of siloing of private information that not being available to the public sector. That is a very clear risk, and these trends clearly just push it even further down that route.
Yeah, I'd like to kind of go back out into the audience and see if anyone has some comments on that in terms of this tension between public data for the public good and is a public good versus those that are privately held data, which I think draws in then some of the challenges that Giles, you were talking about, or the rationale for why you have to do the work that you do, Giles, in terms of the privacy and the data anonymization. So are there any comments? Do you want to comment, please? There's a couple of comments over here to make. Thank you. Remember just to introduce yourself and then thank you.
I'm Ronan Salmon. I'm a consultant medical epidemiologist. I used to work for Public Health Wales and am now retired. In terms of the public and private divide, my first comment, I would just draw your attention to the analogy with confidence in vaccines. Historically, vaccines were developed in universities, or in the famous case of whooping cough, by the bacteriologists of the Michigan State Health Department. So, although they might have had reputational stakes in the use of these things, there were no financial and commercial stakes. And these things, I think, greatly helped in the public acceptance. They were coming from trusted people, from trusted institutions. We can contrast that with mRNA vaccines that come from a sort of combination of tech startups and big pharmaceutical companies, which for a variety of reasons, that, not all of them well-founded, it has to be said, but for a variety of reasons, the public are suspicious of. And I think you see a similar suspicion of some of the artificial intelligence tools because they come similarly from these big organizations, which don't, I think, someone said certainly, don't really have any accountability to public agencies because often they're wealthier, more powerful, and better equipped intellectually than those public agencies that are supposed to be regulating them. So I'll offer you that thought. And I've just one comment on the discussion that went before, which is that this is a centre of expertise on animal disease outbreaks, and so understandably, farmers feature prominently. Apart from en passant references to human health and One Health by you, Lisa, though, I didn't hear any mention of things that were mantras during the 3 years I spent on the board of the Food Standards Agency, which was putting the consumer, or if you prefer, the citizen first, and food that we can trust. Because it seems to me that those things are equally important as goals of the production system, and the data that's being collected can feed into those. And my interest in all this, finally, stemmed from zoonoses. And one of the difficulties you have with zoonoses, it's perfectly possible to have zoonoses that have no visible adverse effects on the economics of production.
Yeah, well, the two things, although separate points, link together something very interesting around trust and trustworthiness in institutions, individuals, in credibility, and in the relationship that we have as knowledge providers, synthesizers with the public, and all the way we started from production into consumption in that very complicated pathway. I'll take the next question and then try and bring that back into the thread, if that would be helpful.
Actually, I wanted to comment on something really similar, that is this private versus public. Private companies, they tend to be more focused on the profit, while we do have the whole problem of One Health and the morality of that. So because the whole epidemiological system means that the animals or the food you produce or the animals you keep, they influence health of other animals, either wild or farm, but also humans or their pets, animals. So there's not enough discussion, in my opinion, about morality of keeping the data private versus making them public to the broader audience, not only to like selected target groups or even research organizations, but just publishing the data that can, like farm, for example, farm location, that can directly influence the health of people. So there's not enough talk about the ethics of that and how it can influence their lives. Yes, thank you.
There's something interesting there that goes back to this conversation earlier about the right to an explanation, and then linking that right to an explanation to the right to health. And there is conversations around whether the right to food is part of a right to health. To come back to your earlier point around what food means and what health means. And I suppose also just to draw in to the audience and to the panel, I guess, the link between, and I was thinking this earlier when we were looking at some of the discussions, for us, one framework is to deliver health of animals, but your point is around health of people. But one might argue that some of what we're discussing here is about the health of the economy, and sometimes health of the economy is directly opposed to health of people in some perverse ways. And I wondered, it ties back into whether or not data are owned and that ethics of what is a collective responsibility. So do the panel want to comment on that first? It's a bit of a...
Actually, I would like to add something regarding the private sector and the public sector, right? At the end of the day, if we think about the private sector, if they will publish their data, then their competitors, they can also use that data. So how actually they will get their profit after a while? And of course, that will be disputable. However, they do have that right to explain at the end of the day, and they might not use artificial intelligence. However, if you provide some regulation, some law regarding these specific issues, I'm sure that they should comply. Even if they won't provide the data, they need to actually follow some steps and in the year be compliant. So I believe that can be solvable just if you have actually regulations as well, especially about this specific topic. What about the data? Yes, it's private, but we still need to have some information about that data. And of course, when they collect the data, even if we think about the collection part, they need to have an ethical approval at the end of the day. So I'm not sure what is actually in your field, but from the AI field, there are ethical boards in universities, yes, in academia, but not only. And you need to be very careful on the way you will collect the data, how you actually share your data, privacy, and even going further for how long you will keep that data, for what projects you will use that data. We can go even further, but actually it's a very huge document that you have to fill out at the end of the day and be sure that everything will be actually ethical and compliant. So I think that can be a starting point for everyone. I'm sure that you have something similar.
Are there other comments from the floor that you want to react to some of those discussions? I mean, I guess the question is, will the market solve everything? I mean, when we're talking about profitability and really going back to the comment, Iain, around making sure that farmers are profitable, and you've made the comment about efficiency, that is at the foremost of people's minds. But in light of the conversation we've had today, what do you think is if you were going to put money on something, where is the place that we need to be focused in terms of that horizon scanning towards the future, specifically with respect to the technologies that have been discussed today, or AI, mindful that just like a vaccine, the technology, AI, or some kind of algorithm is a similar type of intervention that needs to have trust and trustworthiness behind it. Maybe I can go to the floor first and then give you some time to think on the panel of where you would put your investment. What do people in the room think is, are we in the right place? Are we on the edge of where we need to be, or do we need to be moving in a different direction? Please, George and then Dom.
Hi, George Russell from Morden. One of the phrases that EPIC has used many times is the idea of being knowledge brokers. Mm-hmm. And I think maybe if we want to invest in something, we want to be able to invest in that, to actually act as that trusted intermediary. And I'm not just talking about EPIC, I'm talking about the industry, the politicians, the law, that we need to be able to translate the complexities of the data that we have access to into a language that farmers especially can understand and use. And that means that, and I saw the beautiful interface that ScotEID have on the front end of their herd smart algorithm, and it's a source, but in itself it just gives a set of numbers and a set of graphs. And it may well be that you need something else to help translate that. So I think if we want to invest in something, I think it's that ability to actually talk in the language people will understand, to make sure that their understanding of their priorities are correct.
So we're working in the liminal spaces, if you like, in between these boundaries, sort of between these groups, these peoples, these disciplines, but also, I suppose, in the field of ethical and trusted translation for the benefit of the beneficiaries of these types of things, is what you're saying. Dom, do you want to come in on something that's similar to that point, or is make a separate point that I can bring into the panel?
Yeah, thank you. Dominic Mallow, Public Health Scotland. So I think it sort of follows a bit on from what George is saying, and I'm going to be provocative, and I think we're being very lazy about thinking we understand causation. Implicit in all of this stuff is that data will lead to knowledge and correct knowledge, and that if you think about epidemiology, it really is about trying to understand causation so that your intervention is addressing the causes. And that, to some extent, I think in epidemiology, we're a bit obsessed with the techniques and becoming upskilled in new advanced techniques without checking in on the philosophical basis of epidemiology and what it's trying to achieve. And I think current situations where a lot of what we've done has tended to address one thing at a time, and yet we're seeing we have multiple problems to deal with, and a lot of times I think epidemiological approaches identify what they think are a set of causal things, they identify a set of interventions for one thing without necessarily thinking about what are the opportunity costs in other senses. So if you make this intervention, what are you losing? And a lot of time, I think we end up in this. The result is we end up in some sort of morbidity trading, and in that we're dealing with short-term morbidity, and to hell with the consequences if there's long-term morbidity as a consequence of our intervention in the short term.
And when you say morbidity in the long term, you mean at population level? Or individual level?
Both, actually, though probably mostly at the population level. So if your response to one thing causes a long-term problem in other people or other animals, then that's we're not very good at sorting that out.
So then just to sort of summarize, and maybe I won't summarize particularly well, but I'm going to turn back to the panel here. Some of what you're talking about is questioning the epistemology of epidemiology and what it will look like in the future, particularly some of the comments around personalized medicine really challenge what is epidemiology anyway, in terms of what we're trying to do from a utilitarian perspective, perhaps, but you're also having a conversation about trade-offs and the way that we use data for decision making, and we don't think about what some of those trade-offs are, and in fact the way our methodologies work is they aren't fit for purpose to think about those trade-offs. Is that fair?
Yes, it is, and I suppose the bit that I think I would invest in is thinking time. Clearing out a lot of the information overload and actually thinking about stuff.
Okay, well, can I come to the panel? Who would like to respond to that? Thinking time is the question here.
Well,
Iain.
I'll get to thinking time in a minute, because to the question, what would I invest in? I think thinking back to what Tom's presentation yesterday was saying, I think what I'm sure is going to happen, that we're going to have to engage with, is basically doing what we do already, or what we would aspire to doing, but being done more easily and comprehensively. And that's both true of data in general, but also all the AI stuff we've been talking about. So, I mean, in terms of data collection, yes, it clearly, if we had, maybe back in the old days when someone was living with the cow, yes, they saw the cow every hour of the day. But obviously, in many respects, we would say that yes, monitoring, keeping an eye on the animals more regularly, more comprehensively, is probably going to be a good thing. But we don't do it because we can't afford the resource. But if we can actually turn it into a data pipeline and then make use of that data that's a win. And it's not a massive change. It's just kind of doing what we always would have been doing, but doing it more easily. And actually, what you're getting at, I think, Dom, is that is kind of the equivalent in AI, because I was at a seminar a couple of weeks ago, and the guy came over from the States was saying he doesn't see it as artificial intelligence, as automated cognition is where we are at the moment, because it's not making massive intuitive leaps of genius and thinking, but the systems are very good at just plowing through well-defined chains of thought. So that what we would do if we were actually kind of, just something needs to be thought through, and you would just think through along broadly the same lines that you did last week or the month before, but actually deciding what needs to be done. It's good for things like that. But then that can free up us to do the more intuitive and deeper and hopefully even more valuable thinking. But anyway, that's what I think I would gamble on. Basically, a lot of the basic stuff just being done more cheaply and comprehensively.
May I just, because you said something interesting there, I just need to make sure I understand, because I suppose what you're saying is, you mentioned, we don't go and see the cow every day, and actually it might be easier and might make life a little bit faster and more efficient, and we've heard about profitability, but that implies some scalability, and it implies something about a farming sector, and you also implied that it's good. And I'm wondering if you meant that kind of correlation between goodness, scale, and growth for growth's sake necessarily isn't growing, because that is the necessary sort of outcome potentially of scaling things. And maybe that's what we need for food security, but I'm curious if that's what you meant.
I certainly wasn't implying that it was a good thing. Good. What I think I was saying is, given I think the opportunity is there, and for some producers at least, the economic advantage will be there, I believe we'll see it happen.
And what can I just challenge you in terms of what we might lose if we go down that route?
I think there's obvious issues in terms of the ethics of production, people being, those carrying certain activities being even more distant from what's actually happening on the ground, which I guess as a society we need to try and work against.
And then there's a question, I suppose, and I'll come to, because I don't want to leave you out of the panel, but I suppose there's a question for EPIC there in terms of what our responsibility is in marrying those things up in terms of that technological ease, and then keeping an eye on what we care about in terms of animal health and welfare at the other side of that local scale. In terms of, are those conversations that you're having at ScotEID, or are they things that concern you maybe you don't have to speak for ScotEID. In general, if you worked for any company that produced it, I don't want to put you on a spot, but these are the kinds of things that you care about.
I kind of lost you halfway there, so really sorry.
You did? Okay.
I was going to go back to, was it Iain?
Yeah.
About my stats, was it?
Yeah.
I don't know. So we are looking at developing dashboards. So as we get data on MyHealthStats, and as we look at sensor technology, heat sensors, etc., bringing together a dashboard so it does become something meaningful for the farmer. So that is what's work that's in hand at the moment. And I mentioned earlier about active tags, active UHF tags. So that would allow keepers to actually, because that's a tag with a battery that sends a signal to a LoRaWAN, a low area wide something network. So that would, allow keepers to actually monitor their farms and see their animals moving and know where they are. And
great, that sounds exciting. Yep. And are there questions for the panelists on that? Or is there any comments that people want to make to refer to that last part of the conversation? Please.
Thank you. Nicola Holden from SRUC. So yeah, just rewinding a couple of minutes. I think that your question about where we're going to go with data is really interesting, and where we're going to go. But at the end of the day, it does come back to what Iain had said as well about Tom's talk yesterday and the basics in data management. Surely if we can get the fundamentals sorted, because there's still some holes there. there's still some real issues around fair data versus protected and sensitive data as well. And I'm not sure if that circle's ever going to be squared. But I think that, you know, at the end of the day, what we're looking at are really exciting new technological developments in the tools that can be applied. But the fundamentals are still the same, you know, so we have to have some focus. And I think that, Dom, you were kind of referring to that as well. We have to still keep that sort of focus on the fundamentals and make sure that the data that can be shared is being shared. And yeah, if you've got beautiful examples of a dashboard that makes it much more accessible to maybe non-experts to use and maximize the value from that data, all the better. And I think that's, you know, where we should see real developments, and hopefully that does do things like build trust and build confidence.
Thank you. That's a nice place to sort of land on in terms of keeping your foot in the present and getting the fundamentals and the basics right while keeping the eye on the longer term future with these technologies that are evolving at pace. I appreciate that comment very much. I think what I would like to do now, it's gone very quickly this hour, and so what I'd love to get is sort of one last comment from each of the panelists around where, if you like, sort of one thing from this conference or from the position, your discipline, where you think we need to get to in the future on the basis of where we've just had quite a nice sort of anchor point there. So can I start with you, Niamh? What's sort of one thing that you want to leave this audience with?
I mean, just for me, from a very sort of statistical standpoint, in order for sort of these kind of technologies to really take off, one issue that we've had a lot is with sort of the quality of our data. And I don't really know how you're going to improve that, but that would be, I guess, if there was one thing that I could say, oh, this would make my life so much easier, that would be it. It would be
data quality,
improving the consistency and the accuracy of the data we're working with. I have nothing to say about how you would do that, but that would be it for me.
Thank you. Well, I think that's quite a nice segue, actually, from the comment from the floor. Miruna.
I need to say that this is a very tough question, but because Niamh just specify actually the data quality, I do believe that also you should highlight actually some properties of the data and try maybe to provide some training on this and try to let everyone know exactly what are the steps of collecting this data. I'm more than sure that everyone is having missing data, but even so, how you could, for example, imputate that, how you could treat all that missing values, or even going further, should you consider it? So I believe everything should start from maybe a first training of the actual collectors of the data. Yes.
Thank you. Iain, I'm going to come to you last because I'm going to give you the last word. I'm going to come to this side.
So we need to give farmers the tools to collect that data simply. So for sheep, we've got low frequency EID tags. Sheep go through a market abattoir. That data is accurate. It's accurate data. We need to make the collection of things like CPHs simpler, so that they can just, because livestock identification isn't hard. It's a CPH number, which is the land they're on. There's an animal ID with a herd or flock mark, which is associated to that land. So that's where they're born. And then there's the date they move. And make the collection of that data simple. So I think moving on to cattle, bringing in UHF, having readers in markets, abattoirs, if keepers want them on farm, if they want to, it's going to cut out that human error in writing down or transposing a number wrong.
Simple, good, high quality data that's easy to collect. Abbie, do you want to add? Thank you.
Yeah, I think trust and communication are both huge things as well. The communication between all the different elements, whether it's research elements between the farmers, the vets. I think the communication overall would be great, if that worked better, that everyone, understood their part as well. And I think sometimes farmers are possibly underestimated for what they're already doing. A lot of farmers are collecting the data. They maybe just don't know how to use it to their advantage. And I think it would be great to see that barrier overcome, that the data that is already being collected is being used effectively and it's getting back to the farmer for their efficiency and profitability as well at the end of the day.
Yeah, well said. So, so not only the good quality data, but also enabling people to use the data that they have and that are already collecting. Yeah, thank you. Iain, you have the last word on the floor. What are your last thoughts?
I think it's really interesting how our colleagues here in the panel have all been kind of coming at very much the same kind of direction, which is actually what I was going to say as well. I think it really would boil down to foundations. You know, everything we've been talking about is about getting the foundations right, whether it's the foundation of actually collecting the data well, or building the trust so that actually farmers are willing to share it with others, or at least getting the quality right. I mean, my additional contribution was going to be about understanding the provenance and structures of the data. It's like what Stephen was saying earlier about, you know, it's no good having a data set, for example, and not actually realizing that actually a certain class of still births are not even included in it. Because if you don't actually understand that fundamental property of the data, you're going to totally go down the wrong track. And that is also, of course, fundamental to a lot of the work in AI and other things that we've been kind of starting to kind of scope out, because rubbish in, rubbish out. So that we're all talking about the same things about quality, trust, understanding the provenance, and basically getting those basics right.
And I think that's a really lovely point to end on. And trust takes a lot of time. You earn trust, and you have to build it and renew it and refresh it. And I think it's a great opportunity to thank everybody in the audience for participating in that and being part of EPIC. That is a fundamental element of what we try, at least we attempt to do, with not only our policy audiences, but our farming audiences and other stakeholders and the public, I think, as well. So with that, I'm going to conclude the panel because I think I might be just on time, or we have a little bit of time. Does anybody want any concluding remarks from the floor? Please. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. I think we've had an interesting day in all sorts of ways, but I think there's one thing that every single person in this room has in common. There's only one thing that none of us can do without, and that's food and water. And what we're all trying to achieve is to produce that in a better and more efficient way. So we all have a common goal. But I think we should keep that common goal very much in mind and where we do within our various disciplines in trying to make that easier and more efficient. And at the end of the day, remember that here in Scotland we have a reputation for producing the very best of food. And everything that we're all doing is working towards that goal. We can't do without it. It's the only profession which we can't do without at all.
Thank you very much. That is a very nice place on which to end, on a common purpose that brings everyone together inside the room, and a clear restatement of the vision. So with that, I just want to thank all of our panelists. It's an excellent field, really very thoughtful answers to questions, and my word salad sometimes, Scott. So thank you very much, everybody.